Hey, everybody, welcome back to Great Mondays Radio. I am so excited to have with me today Melanie Huggins, who is the executive director of Richland Library in South Carolina. And I'm as you might know, I'm pretty passionate about libraries and have interacted with and have colleagues and friends at libraries across the country. And so I'm thrilled to have Melanie here. She's the executive director. Welcome, Melanie. Thanks for coming on Great Mondays Radio.
Hey, Josh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. How long have you been executive director at the library?
So I've been here, I just started my 15th year at Richland Library here in Columbia, South Carolina. I've been in the profession for 30 years and in management and administration for almost all but 2 of those. So yeah, it seems unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have, and we discussed previously, there's been some, big changes and transitions during your time. And I'm really interested to know about kind of some of the shifts that you have seen or been part of, and some of the challenges that you've tried to overcome, and how maybe you've done that. Can you tell me a little bit about some of those opportunities, some of the things that have changed at the library, and the context for some of those? Because I think that's kind of where the opportunities really always lay.
Yeah, I think so. When I started here in 2009, I inherited a really strong library system, award-winning, beloved, and relatively in the terms of like library world new. All of our branches, we at the time we had a main library and 10 branches, and they had all been built since, in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And
Mm.
in a library lifespan, that's a new branch. That's not like, a new system. That's not like a library that has like 3 Carnegies in it or something
Yeah,
like that.
right. Yeah.
So I inherited this really strong system. And so it seemed to me, and I guess the moment where I kind of started to realize that in this system, there was a culture shift that needed to happen was, and I think a way a lot of this comes to light for us is in the systems and policies, practices. I was seeing practices that made a whole heck of a lot of sense to the librarians and the library staff,
Uh-huh.
but 0 sense to the customer. And so the first time that happened, I was on the floor with staff, and they were showing me their proud new books display. And I was, asking them questions. And I said, what are all these stickers on the spine of the book? What do those mean? What do these coded dots mean? And the staff person at the time was like, you know, it's our system for how long a book can check out. And so of course, like if you were in a shoe store, and you see the colored dots on the shoe boxes, that means there's a sale of some kind. So of course I look up and around and I'm like, okay, well, where's the key for this? Like, how
Right,
would I
right.
know as a customer? So anyway, we were, I was like, I kept asking questions, and the staff was getting a little annoyed with me, like, well, it's just the system. And I'm like, well, how do you decide which book gets to check out for 7 days as opposed to 21 days? And they were like, it's because of how long it is. And I was at that moment just like, oh, that makes 0 sense to me as a reader. Because
Yeah.
if a book was long, you needed it longer. If it was short, you could read it faster. I mean, it was all of these assumptions we were making.
Uh-huh.
And that's when I realized is our staff doesn't even have the same view of what the customer's needs and motivations and goals are. They're developing all of these systems around how they think a library should be run. And I think that was kind of the beginning for me of, we've got to reinvent the customer experience here from the outside in. Let's get feedback from customers. Let's find out what they really
Mm.
want and develop systems. And so that was really the beginning of the transformation. And it wasn't until years later that I started realizing that what I was doing in committing to a brand and committing to service design as a methodology was recreating a culture.
Right. Did you find that that story, I think, is emblematic of many organizations where a thing has been done a certain way, and then they're frustrated. They may be frustrated and say, "Hey, this is what we do." Did you continue to feel that pushback when you're like, "Hey, we're going to start thinking about changing these things," or maybe you didn't even say that, and you were like, we're going to do some research first, right? You and I know, and probably a lot of my listeners know, that doing customer research and understanding from their point of view is a big aha. That's a huge input. Did you tell employees that was going to happen? Did they say, well, that's great, let's do that? Or how did you go about engaging them? How did they respond? Because that's a big piece of that, is the changing of the culture. It's changing how people do their work.
Right, right. I think I would say it first started in the way that I engage with staff and the questions that I ask. So if I said, hey, we're gonna, go from staff assisted checkout to self checkout, of course, this was big back in the 90s and 2000. Like, how do we do that? And what I would hear from staff was, well, they won't like that. And my first question is, who is they? Like,
Right.
they, right? And then and then the second question was, and how do we know that they won't like it? So it was more about centering the customer's needs, motivations, goals, and the experience we were trying to create for the customer. And so I got here in 2009, and by 2013, and I tell everybody, it takes some years to change a culture, right? And then it takes even more years to iterate and care and feed and care and feed and care and feed the culture.
Yes.
But after 4 years of being here, I had staff going through service design boot camps, really buying into this idea that we are designing for a target audience. And that is difficult for libraries, because libraries like to say we serve everyone. But you can't serve everyone well, and you've got to know who your target audience is for each program, for each initiative, for each service. And so within 4 years, we were speaking that language internally. And that coincidentally was the year that we put forward a major bond referendum in our city that turned us into a 1 library, 10 branch library, to a 1 main library, 10 branch library, to a 1 main library, 12 branch library, with every single library has been renovated from top to bottom. And so we actually got to create the environment and the physical space and qualities that we wanted in the physical space to actually match that customer experience. All of that, I think culture to me is like a puzzle. It's like, it's some combination of your brand, your promises to your community, the way you design services, how you position yourself strategically in the community, and then how all that comes together to empower staff to embody all of those things you're promising people.
That's right. I agree. I think that concept of a promise. So I come from brand, and we talk about a brand promise, but once you make a promise, you have to keep it. How do you keep it? So I'm really interested in the choice you made to what you just said: run your staff through service design boot camps, because that seems like a very deliberate decision and investment. Why would an organization need to do something like that, whether it's a service design boot camp or whatever you might call it, right? Like like a management training, or maybe we'll call it a culture design boot camp, like whatever it might be. That's a lot of time, effort, energy. Is that necessary? I mean, how did you make that decision? Because otherwise, I don't think a lot of organizations would necessarily think to do that. They would say, this is how we do things now, do it.
Yeah. Well, that doesn't last if you do that. That's really hard. So I would say most library directors that I know are super intelligent people, and they understand and can envision the type of customer interactions they want on a day-to-day basis in our library. And for us, learning how to do service design and creating our own service design training and tools and creating a common language around that was just the tool that we chose
Mm,
to help us create and design those experiences. I felt like I got our library pretty far, getting them to understand that every experience that a customer or even internal customers. So I also want to say this is not just external facing, right? This is the way that we treat each other as well.
good.
I think I did the most I could do with the skills that I have and the knowledge that I had at the time to get our organization thinking about every experience has a before, a during, and an after. And, it's just like a good story, which librarians should kind of understand, has a before, during, and after. And I felt like we were putting a lot of emphasis on the during, but we weren't thinking about what the customer journey was before or even after. So that's the language we started with. Like, who are we trying to serve? And what's their experience before they ever step through the door? They need something from us. How do they find out about us? What's that whole arc of that, that journey map that we call it now, right? Because we know the words. So we were doing that work. But we got to a point where we needed to bring in some expertise to help us really create those internal capacity to do this work on an ongoing basis. I didn't want to just keep bringing someone in to solve all of our problems. I
Right.
wanted my staff to know how to use the tools to constantly iterate and put the customer in the center. And so that's why we, went the service design route, because it made the most sense for us. And I mean, I just can't recommend it enough, because now we speak this language here.
Mm.
And we shorthand it, and it doesn't take a 2-day long workshop to figure out something anymore. It can take like 2 hours. It's a really nice way of working, and it has totally changed the culture.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the fishing analogy, right? Like you now have a shared experience, and they have experienced why this is important as opposed to what you need to do, so that they can internalize and actually respond in a more productive way.
Mm-hmm.
That makes
Yes. Oh, I'm so excited. I just thought of something. The other thing is that the thing that I love about service design and about it being, that double diamond, and it's iterative and you're always going back and tweaking and making it better, is it also does something that I think libraries desperately need to feel comfortable with, and that is testing and prototyping. You
ooh,
know, we're not really good at letting people see the sausage while it's being made. And I think we need to get better about that. So when we were renovating our buildings, we knew we wanted to custom design our desk, our interaction points. So we built some out of plywood and used them for a while so that people could say, and before you spend $30,000 on some really swanky millwork, make sure it's going to work for you. That's a physical way that we do that. But we're testing something right now in one of our branches, an underutilized rural location. We've basically turned into a print and design studio. And we're testing out this concept for customers to be able to come in and have unlimited printing and be able to print beautiful photographs and use a Cricut or a laminator or a binder and get all of those services in this rural community that doesn't have an Office Depot or a Staples. To see if that's something we can replicate in our other locations.
Oh, interesting. So you're using that so you thought, how did you even land on that? I mean, that you're like, what we need, right? You didn't wake up in the morning and say, what we need is a laminator and a spiral O binder.
Yeah, I mean, customer observation, and knowing the community. I mean, this is a rural community that's seen a declining population. And faxing, it sounds like, I would love to be able to see by show of hands of the podcast listeners, when's the last time you've had to fax anything?
Right.
But faxing is still a way that socioeconomically challenged people have to do business. it is still a big part of their life, and there are very few places. So we provide free faxing, right? So we're seeing people coming for that service. We talk to them about other things they are doing. We're seeing them designing their, wedding programs and their church bulletins and all of these things, observing that the traffic in the building, the people are only staying for a few minutes because they're faxing, copying, and they're leaving. Well, what's the adjacent, what are the adjacent possible things to that we could be doing? And so that's why we're testing this out there.
That's so interesting. Are there other services that you guys, I mean, again, this is just Josh fascination with library question, less culture, but more, how else are people using libraries? Are there like unexpected ways? Because I know then in our work with the DC Public Library, there's a shift in how staff perceives the role of the library, right? They set up a co-working space with computers for people to use, right? So that's a great way to do it. And a traditional library sciences employee is not, may not understand that you want laminating, you want all these things. So you're observing, tell me, are there other in your experience, maybe it was previously, maybe it's happening now, other unexpected use cases that people are coming to the library for?
Well, yes, I think we're super fortunate that we did have that bond referendum and we were able to renovate our buildings from top to bottom. By about 2018, they were all done. And one of the key things we did in every single location is we added meeting room space. And so in our main library, we went from having like 8 meeting rooms to 28 meeting rooms.
Oh my gosh.
So remote work, did we know that the future was going to be remote work when we did that? No, but man, we took a lucky guess with some of that stuff, because we are packed every day with people who no longer go into an office, who just want to have a quiet place to be and have fast internet and maybe some of those other services, all the time. So what's rebounded the most since COVID is meeting room use. People coming in and using our physical space. And we love that. We've baked that into our strategic plan, that we want to be that place where remote workers go. And they not only get access to a lovely space and fast internet, but social capital. So we host, 1 Million Cups is hosted here. The Kauffman Foundation program, where all the entrepreneurs get together. We do that once a week. We've become this hub for innovation, people with entrepreneurial mindsets. The space helps that tremendously. And the thing of going back to the thing about culture is that what happens usually is that other libraries or even other nonprofits or other, community partners that we're close with here in Columbia or in our county will see what we've done. They're like, how did you do that? Like, how did you get from point A to point B? And I probably need to write a book about it, but how did you do it? And so I always start with, we first started really laser focusing on needs, motivations, outcomes for the customer, and really clearly defining where we fit in that journey, because libraries can't do everything, and some things we aren't best positioned to do. So that strategic plan piece of it. And then it was like, and what differentiates us from everybody else that wants to help people find a job, or everybody else that wants to be that third space? What are the differentiators? And that's where our brand promises came in. It's like, this is how we're different, because we promise these things. And then it was like, what are the things getting in our way? And some of it was policies, practices, the way we onboarded might have been getting in our way. It's like we had to make all of that stuff align. And that's what's made us the culture that we are. But people usually ask the question, the question is always about change management. Like, how did you change? How did you get from point to this point?
Exactly.
Walk me through the change management strategy. I was like, there was no change management strategy. There was just a focus on doing what we could do really well in the context of the community that we live in. And then provide the tools and resources that staff need to make that happen. And that's where culture comes into, because we have to operationalize culture in our policies and practices. So it's not left to chance.
What would you, I think libraries have a particular challenge and opportunity, incredible opportunity, in that it is, most people, most staff, most employees of a library system are either directly interacting with customers or maybe are one step removed, right? It's very much in front. And so you can say, it's really important that we focus on customers in this way. A lot of organizations don't have that opportunity. And I wonder if you might have some advice or suggestions to help those employees that don't have a direct connection to the customer, because it almost feels like the more removed you are, the harder it's going to be to say, oh, but we need to be customer centric. We need to be, service that we're serving the customer. Do you have any suggestions or ideas? I know I'm just tossing this out at you, but it feels to me like this is such an important piece, and there's so many companies that are out there that are just like, yeah, we create a web tool and people use that, right? There's user experience, sure, but whatever, I'm just doing my thing back here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so what I was thinking of when you were talking is, so I do a lot of work in and with and volunteer and otherwise with nonprofits and philanthropic organizations. And so a lot of philanthropic organizations do not have direct contact with their clients or customers that they ultimately benefit, right?
Yes, exactly.
That might be a good analogy.
Perfect.
That, they're out there raising money and they're, doing all the things to make sure that the people who do the service have the support that they need. But I think it goes back to, what would I say to them about like creating this culture, is that I don't think you can separate your company culture from the outcomes you create, even if you don't get to see those firsthand. So in philanthropy, you have to do the work to talk to the organizations that you fund to better understand, I'm trickling on down here, to get closer and closer and closer and closer to the outcome, the journey. That if you're funding a center for people experiencing homelessness, even if you are a foundation, that you have some sense of what that's like, because we know that a good way to build more stakeholder engagement, more volunteers, more donors, more loyalty is to tell a good story. And so you got to be able to tell those stories about what's happening on the front line, even if you don't do it. And so you have to either, in this analogy of a philanthropic organization, you got to talk to the people that you're funding, and don't just ask them for the report that says, how did you spend the grant money?
Right.
Ask them to tell you stories about the people that they've helped. Get that qualitative feel-good stuff, so you can take that, scoop that back and take that into your foundation or whatever, and run your foundation in a way that aligns with those feelings and that brand, that promise that you're giving to people. I don't know, that was a little, you threw me off on that one, but I'm just thinking, I think a lot
No, it's great.
I think a lot of people are in that, situation, in that what they do, whether it's a designer that's designing websites, they may not know exactly, but you got to do some research to figure it out. You got to at least take a step back every once in a while and go, yeah, this is a great website, but how does the person who just used it feel after they use it? Get them to tell you a story about that.
Exactly. Okay. So yeah, that's exactly, I love that. That's a great answer. And I appreciate you engaging with me on a flyer there. But so it reminds me of some of the stories where it's like the CEO, CEO is, it's like the server for the day or whatever it is. And so it's like you have the leaders actually get in there and learn and connect, right? There's some of those stories, but what I feel like is very doable is getting doing the work, finding some people that will go out and actually gather those stories and learn how those people, who those people are and how they engage and how they use your product. So even if we're talking about, someone using some sort of tech product, some
Mhm.
enterprise product,
Mhm.
learning about those people and bringing those inside is really going to help direct and navigate people, help them navigate their choices, and be able to lean on that and say, hey, when we're talking about a particular value or we're talking about a particular
Yes.
behavior that we're emphasizing, it's not some abstract construct of
Right.
like, hey, we just decided as change managers that we want to do this. It's ultimately that is who we are serving, and we're doing this because we want to get it to them faster, higher quality, more interesting feature, whatever it might be. And I love that idea. Bring stories into the organization. People are so data driven these days. I really feel we are missing, there's a dearth of qualitative information, there's a dearth of stories, and that's
That's
the most
data.
compelling, that brings it to life.
Yeah, and that's data. So I'll give you an example of that, just a real quick example of how, I mean, I would rather, now we serve a population of, our county's 700,000 people. We have 13 locations, about 400 staff, whatever. I would rather talk to 12 people for 1 hour each about an interaction with the library than do a survey of 1,000 people. So that is what and we've done that. We've changed whole systems and ways of working just by talking to 12 people.
Yep.
So that whole directed storytelling piece, where you sit down with somebody and you say, tell me about the last time you checked out a book from the library, and they start telling their story and you're listening and you don't know where it's going. You're just listening and pulling out the threads. And if they say, oh, and then, I thought I put the book on hold, but when I got the notice, I got to the library and it was actually the audiobook and that wasn't what I wanted. Well, why was that? What happened? This is a real life example because we did interview people about our holds process and somebody told us that. And we went in and looked at our icons on our website, and the icon for audiobook, CD, and whatever were very similar. And it was easy to see how somebody could
Yeah.
accidentally put the wrong thing on hold, right?
Yeah.
Changed a whole system because of that one story. So
Yeah.
I think that libraries especially, we should be cultures of stories. We should be
Yeah.
the kind of culture that understands how important a good story is to expressing who we are and what our needs and motivations are.
Amazing. Amazing. So many things that I'm pulling from this. You've told us about a few successes. Are there any, and you have been very successful, and I don't want to take away from that, but are there any experiments or elements of this process that you've been through in the last 15 years that you would say failed and you learned from? Is there anything that we can learn from your hard won hard won knowledge?
Oh, let's think about that. I mean, I think, okay, I'll say this about our culture here is we try to bake failure in so that it's not a big deal. So it's really hard for
Wonderful.
me to say, oh, this failed, this failed big time, because we are iterating all the time.
Lots of small failures.
Yes, yes, and they're not even failures. They're just tests, right? We're testing it, and then this didn't work, and let's test this, and let's test that. I think for me personally, I think some painful failure has to do more with hiring. When you're hiring for cultural fit, and I know that is loaded in all kinds of ways, me saying that out loud, because people with an EDI lens might think, oh, we know what you're talking about. No, I mean, for me, really, it is about hiring for, are you going to understand that we are an organization that is highly collaborative, but really fast paced? And what does that mean together? Are you going to understand that we are, a culture that is dedicated to sharing, not just sharing books and materials like libraries do, but actually sharing our entrepreneurial mindset with the community.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, all of that's to say, you think you get the interview questions down that are going to get at that. You think you've hired the right person. They seem to have all the qualities, but something's missing. And so I don't know if that's a hiring decision or an emotional, making decisions about the emotional part of your culture or the qualitative, the characteristics of somebody instead of the competencies. But, I have really, unfortunately, put some people in positions where they couldn't succeed because I feel like they had 80% of the cultural fit, but some really important things were missing in the 20%. So yeah, that's
how do you attempt to prevent that mistake now?
Well, first of all, those are the most painful kinds of mistakes because they're dealing with people's lives, and people's livelihood. And so when you
You feel
promote,
terrible about,
you feel
because it's
terrible.
not there. I mean, you're like, I love your perspective, right? Because it's not like, oh, they're a crappy person. It's they weren't. I did not see that they were not going to be successful in this role. People can be, the same person can be successful in one role and not another, in one organization and not another. So I want to at least call that out and point that as a positive perspective.
Right. We have a really diverse staff. We've worked really hard to have a diverse staff. And I mean diversity of all ways, race, ethnicity, skill sets, thought.
Yeah.
We've worked really hard to do that. And I would say most of the time it works out well. I know everybody's big fans of behavioral interviewing and all of those questions you're supposed to ask that would show how someone would react in a certain situation. I mean, certainly those are helpful. We do a lot of panel interviewing, with a diverse team. So they're looking for things that I'm not looking for. So that's a good preventative thing. And also on a really small scale, if we tell somebody who's not from here or not of our team already that we're going to interview with a panel, their reaction to that alone can tell you if they're going to be a good fit here, because it's like high school. We do a lot of group projects here. We work collaboratively a lot. So if you are uncomfortable, it doesn't mean you have to be this wild extrovert, but if you're uncomfortable just being in a room with, 8 people that you don't know, that's going to tell me something about. So I don't know how to prevent it. I hope I don't ever do it again, but
I mean, look, we're all making mistakes, but I think that idea of multiple people assessing, thinking about, and so that you can minimize blind spots.
Yes,
because you'll never be able to get rid of them.
That's right.
It's just, I mean, it's that's why it's called, it's like this inherent bias, right? And you learn to be aware of it, but you can't get rid of it.
That's right.
And so I think that's a great way to think about that. Any final thoughts or stories that you that we haven't talked about that you'd like to share with the audience, something that we can learn from, or anything out there? I mean, I think that your the way that you are talking about and thinking about how you are as a leader and what what you want for your organization, I think is just really rare. And it's so, having that awareness is so spectacular. And I think you're reaping obviously the benefits, because it is hard. Library systems, this is everybody and anybody can show up at the door, and there you have 12 doors, 12 buildings, and they could want anything from you and you don't know. So to be able to prep your staff and to be able to invest in that, what you're talking about, a 4-year journey of that's a long-term investment. And a lot of leaders aren't able to think that long-term. And so I don't know, I just want to call out how awesome that is. To see someone like you modeling that leadership kind of behavior.
Well, thank you for saying that, because it does feel, and that 4-year piece of just kind of redefining who we were was just the beginning. Because here's the thing, is we're always hiring new people. that we've got to figure out how to get in the door, understand who we are. And even if you've worked in another library before, you haven't worked at this library. So it's, it's like, or even if you've done adjacent work, it's like, what's different about us? And I mean, we were in a hiring freeze last year because our budget was so tight. We had fewer people leave last year than in the Great Resignation, even when they were strapped. So that tells us something about the culture here, is that they were willing to work twice as hard and be short-staffed for the short term to stay here. So we've hired almost 80 new staff members since February. That's a lot for an organization of my size.
That's a ton.
That's a lot. And so trying to figure out, okay, how do we make sure that the onboarding is what we need it to be? How do we make sure that people understand that we want them to make good decisions on the front line, that we trust their judgment? And, and I do listening sessions with staff. So I just had one this morning where I just go out, anybody can come, and I'm in a branch for 2 hours and they just come talk to me and ask me questions and tell me about their experience. And then we kind of put together all the trends and themes, and that helps us operationalize the culture. Like we just, we do open PTO. We have 100% paid FMLA now. All of these things have come from us being caring, welcoming, committed to the best, fresh and fun and helpful. And those are our brand promises, not just to the public, but to our staff. So it's just,
I love that.
It's never finished. It's never finished, and if I said it was, I would, it gets stale. You have to keep care and feeding of the culture. And that means you just double down on the things that are important and operate. And I keep saying operationalize, and that could be a whole nother conversation for another day. But I do think that a lot of us get hung up with policies and procedures, and we want everything to be the same and consistent across the board. But that is a surefire way to smother the culture of caring and innovation. So let's figure out how to have those procedures and policies that we really need and just get rid of the rest of them. And we're always doing that. We're not there yet. We're working on it.
Melanie Huggins, Executive Director of Richland Library in South Carolina. You can learn and visit Richland Library and of any of the 12 branches, but you can visit online, richlandlibrary.com, RICHLAND library.com. Melanie, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and modeling leadership. There's just so many amazing things that you have shared today, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks, Josh.